And then hopefully Patty will come in soon. Okay. Planning board meeting, January 11th, 2021. Let's get started. Happy New Year, everyone. So we have minutes, 2 minutes from November 23rd and December 14th. Do I have a motion to approve both of them, or can I do both of them at a time?
Yeah, unless there's issues of people's recusals and things, you can do both at one time.
Okay. Motion?
So
Okay,
moved.
Matt. Okay, second. Jane, you want a second? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I'm an aye, but for the second one, I wasn't there, so I have trouble voting on it.
Well, I wasn't there for the first one, but I still think we're 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we're still good. Okay. Okay, great. Is there anyone here for public comment? Right. So,
Julie, was that wave meaning that you were here for public comment as well, or no?
I think it was hello.
Okay.
hey, I'm trying to, Andy Willingham, can we start the, without Patty Brooks, do you think? She may not be coming.
It would be kind of strange for her to not come to something like this. I wonder if she can't find the link. Because I was having trouble finding where the link was.
On
On
the,
the agenda.
yeah, it's on
Yeah.
the agenda.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
I also emailed it to her last week and she responded. I don't have her cell phone number though. Or
Do you
anything.
think because she's down as third thing on the agenda, she didn't come in right away because she thought there was other stuff happening before her part?
I don't know, I feel like she's usually she seems to be pretty timely. I feel like she would.
Yeah, I have her cell number, Alana. I'm gonna.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that would be good because,
Why don't you just text her or something?
All right.
okay, just in the meantime, Ingrid is our guest here.
Yeah, hold on.
No, I can let him know if you'd like us to go next.
Okay, well, let's see what's happening with Patty, and then if we can't find her, then we'll go with Mr. Dupree. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, she's jumping on in a second.
Jane, I just realized you're not at the pyramids anymore.
No, this is a mosque in Cairo. I decided to change my location. I'm still in Egypt. It's still my favorite.
Okay.
If there wasn't so much, I'd be ready to go back. I can change it if it bothers you. I had a complaint but once before.
Looks fine to me.
Oh, well, we've got everybody now.
Okay, I think Patty, you're in, right?
She's here. I just asked her to unmute, so she just has to unmute her.
Okay, so Andy, do you want to take the lead on this? Make sure that everything is up to snuff because we have a resolution if everything else is in order.
Sure. I think, I think we were pretty much there last meeting. We went through seeker last meeting. Then the only issue I had left was just making sure the shed thing was, dotting all the i's and crossing the t's on that. So I think Rick's has a plan for that in the resolution. So I don't have anything outstanding on this left.
All right, so Patty, do you have anything else you want to comment on? You have to unmute.
I don't know why she's not unmuting.
Okay, well, Rick, you think we could just move forward with the resolution?
Well, no, there's a couple of things that need to get addressed. One of which is that there are sidewalks that are required. In the past, upon a request, this board has been able to go ahead and eliminate that requirement. There's different places in the code, depending upon whether you not have a site plan application with respect to sidewalks or subdivisions. This one is related to subdivision, so it's under section 121-22 of the town code. And that says that that sidewalks shall be provided, except that at the discretion of the planning board, sidewalks may be eliminated. Now, typically, we have a specific written request for that waiver, and you act upon it. To my knowledge, we have not yet received a request for a waiver, but it doesn't say that it's required to be a written waiver request. It just says at your discretion, it can be eliminated. So that's an issue that you can address tonight, even though there hasn't been a requested waiver, although I think better form is certainly to have a waiver. But legally, it doesn't stop you from acting upon it if you wanted to act upon it. The other thing is, and Alana can confirm this, to my knowledge, as of recently, the owner Clayton had still not issued or given to the planning department an owner authorization. To me, that's substantial in that you should never be authorizing approval except with the authorization of the landowner, a written authorization. And you have forms, and I know that Alana had asked several times for this form to be given. I think as of the other day, it still hadn't been, but Alana can give you an update on that.
You know, we have it. She sent it to me. I think I got it over to John last week. The one for David Clayton?
Yes.
Yeah. No, it was,
Okay.
I think Patty had gotten it in October and then for some reason, it didn't get sent with the rest of the application, but it's dated October 26th.
Okay, I did not see that. All right. Well, then the board, so then that's fine on that issue. And I apologize for not being up to date on that. The other one is the sidewalks. So if you want to eliminate the sidewalks for this application and looking upon the plans, then you can eliminate it. You have that power. If you don't want to eliminate it, then they have to put in sidewalks and it has to be on the plan.
Did the applicant request this waiver?
Yeah, I think, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Ah, okay. I had to dial in by phone because I'm apologize. I'm trying to run my husband's fire department Zoom meeting at the same time. And I didn't realize that was going to be such a conflict. So I had sent an email to Andy and Rick basically outlining how I didn't think in reading through the code that it was actually applicable because it appeared to only relate to subdivisions where new roads were being constructed. But if that
Patty,
was not the interpretation of the board, I certainly would be putting in a written waiver.
Yeah, the provision that you provided is not the applicable provision. The applicable provision is a different one under the subdivision section 121-22. And that's the provision that requires the sidewalks specifically.
Okay. I had written down a different one at the meeting last month. I apologize. So I want to make sure I recite the correct section when I request a waiver.
That's on me a little bit, Rick. I gave her that section, we were at the meeting, and that is another section that talks about sidewalks, but
So the board can, if Patty wants to verbally request it, although that's not standard with your practice, it's not illegal for you to consider that verbal request, which as I understand is going to be followed up by a written request by Patricia so that it is in the record.
And I could date the request today so that it is of the same date as the, whatever motions are made by the board.
What's behind the request for the waiver?
Just that they don't want to put in sidewalks.
Well,
Right.
again, we're talking about a very rural road. You have seen photographs of the site that show that it's very steep coming down to the road with virtually no shoulder. So I don't know where sidewalks would be constructed, if in fact they could be. And basically, it's in an area town where there's no place potentially that sidewalks would want to go to. It's not that it's just outside of a hamlet or that it's within a subdivision where you would create your own walkable community. And
If
those
I
are the
might
reasons
respond to
I-
that for just a second and help the board with this, is that it's usually not a good argument to say that there are no other sidewalks around, because under that, then you'll never get any sidewalks. So that the process has to start somewhere. But I think that an issue that the planning board needs to take into account is that I think this is a provision under the subdivision and wanting sidewalks in subdivisions. This is only, if you will, technically a subdivision. That is, it's really a lot line change. Your code defines it as a subdivision, but it's not the type of traditional subdivision where you are having a larger parcel of land that you are subdividing into smaller lots for purposes of, putting homes on those or businesses on those smaller lots for development. So it is a little bit different than your typical subdivision request for not wanting to have sidewalks. This is really a lot line change in which typically you wouldn't, the issue doesn't come up with respect to sidewalks, except in your code, you define those types of lot line changes as subdivisions. And that's what kicks in that provision. So that it's not your typical circumstance where you would want sidewalks to be considered. Typically, it's when you have a larger lot being subdivided into smaller ones for development.
So can I ask Andy what Andy, you've got an idea of this, of the steepness of the slope and everything. Do you agree that it would be a difficult place to put a sidewalk?
I have to look at the topo there
Yeah.
on the road. Just give me a second here.
Can someone just confirm the address?
It's 2,
290, right?
yes,
And there's no other
290,
sidewalks
292.
on that street? Correct?
No,
That's correct.
So to put a sidewalk would be new.
Yeah.
Well,
so you
people
start-
do walk on that street. It connects to Huguenot Street. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big walking street.
I got you.
I mean, I think in the past, what we've done is to say that if the town decides that they would like to put a sidewalk, that we have the option to ask the owners to do that. Is that possible, Rick?
To do what?
I can't hear you, Rick.
I apologize. It gets very complicated because you may be talking about somebody 10 years from now. And so you would have to have some kind of covenant filed to be carried forward in deeds that upon the triggering of some event that you would have to define as to whether or not maybe sidewalks were being constructed on either side of these properties, that then they would be under an obligation to build the sidewalks. You could do that. Whenever you have a power to go ahead and waive something, you can certainly waive it with conditions, because otherwise, if you don't waive it, then they just have to build it. So that the answer is yes. Something could be done, and we could modify the resolution to require that upon some circumstance that you determine, that the owners at that time would be required to go ahead and put in sidewalks. They would be on notice of it if we required that to be a covenant and a deed restriction that had to be filed before this plan was going to be signed.
Anyone else on the planning board want to weigh in on that? Lyle, what do you think?
Well, it seemed like in the past, it wasn't just sidewalks. I thought it was like a little cluster of street improvements, including street trees, sidewalks, can't remember if it was curbs or something like that. Like, I'm just looking for it in my code book, trying to find it, but it was, they had letters attached to them. There's so many of them, and we would take, the applicant would put in a waiver for exemption from those improvements. And in the past, sometimes we've taken an easement off the front of the lot so that if we ever had a sidewalk district formed, that it would already have the land available.
Yeah, Lyle, you're referring to 12117B, which is the one that's been looked at in the past, and it says streets and highways suitably placed, paved, and improved with the following. And it lists 7 different kinds of improvements, including sidewalks, water mains, sanitary sewers.
I don't think that doesn't apply in this case.
Well, I think it depends how you read it. It says streets and highways that are suitably placed shall have those items. And I guess you could say that there's no street being placed here. The street is already there.
Can I ask that people who aren't speaking mute themselves? Because I'm getting this weird, I'm having trouble hearing everybody.
And that's good. Andy, how far is it from Huguenot Street? Is that like a mile and a half?
No, less.
Not to be, I don't understand. Like, the houses would have to, like, there's a lot of houses there that would have to all want to put sidewalks in to allow, right? It doesn't really make sense to me, like, why you would put a sidewalk in there. I mean, I guess potentially 100 years from now, they could want sidewalks.
Or maybe next year. You just, things happen around here,
Yeah,
right?
but to do it next year would mean all those people that are living in those houses would all have to be, the town would have to decide to put sidewalks in all of a sudden.
H.W. Du Bois, how about that? It happens. It happens.
Okay.
I'm not advocating. It's just, I know that, I just remember doing this in the past. So we can decide today to do this waiver. Not Lyle, I'm sorry.
I'm not advocating for it either. I just want to make sure that we've covered the code.
You had done a waiver for sidewalks for the New Pole storage.
Right. And they paid a fee.
Yes, they had to pay, they had to put money into a pot so that if
That
there
was
was
what
a
I was gonna
sidewalk that was
mention,
put
yes.
in, we would have the money for it later. Right? But this is a different scenario.
Yes, it is.
We're on a totally rural road. No one's ever talked about a sidewalk ever.
It's 3/4 of a mile from the intersection with Huguenot Street.
Right, I'm just curious if people are like wandering around off Huguenot Street and they walk 3/4 of a mile away and they want to have a sidewalk.
I walk around there.
On a sidewalk?
There's no sidewalk.
Saying there are people who walk there. If there isn't a sidewalk there, I can't walk on it.
I know. I don't have one on my street either.
Okay, you want to, maybe we should just make a motion for a waiver and see how we do. How's that? Jane, you want to make that motion?
Sure, so moved.
I'll
That's a
second,
waiver for the sidewalk.
Right.
this is,
Wow.
I'll second it.
Okay, well, I'll second. Is there any discussion on this? Okay, so we're voting for.
Wait, I had to unmute myself.
Okay,
Yeah, I know, I don't see why we wouldn't perhaps do something similar to what we did for New Pub Storage. So that if there is a future desire by the town or the neighborhood to have a sidewalk, that this particular lot has already got that addressed.
So I guess I would ask, where is New Paltz Storage in relationship to where this property is?
It doesn't have anything to do with this property. It just happens to be the last one that we dealt with this on the same thing.
Well, I guess the reason I was asking is because I think that each one needs to be looked at individually, dependent on the location of the property and the merits of what the applicant is doing. Again, as Mr. Golden pointed out, this is a simple lot line revision where nobody is financially benefiting from the action that's taking place, unlike New Paltz Storage, which I'm going to make an assumption because I'm not familiar with it, is a viable business that's going to be generating revenue and be able to pay for the sidewalk. So I'm just asking that each one, be looked at independently based on what the application is before the board and the location that the property is placed in, because again, I wish I could show you the photographs of the rock ledge. We had difficulty even finding places to post the signs because of the rock that is in front of it. It's not in front of the entire property, but there's quite a section of it where there's rock ledge that would make it almost cost prohibitive. Not cost prohibitive, that would be the wrong terminology to use, because with enough money you can do anything, right? But it would make it extremely difficult for somebody to post the amount of money that would be required to put a sidewalk in the amount of road frontage that we have here for the application that's at hand.
So that's where the question was to our engineer about the topography. I don't think we ever got an answer.
Well, because the topography doesn't always show rock features, I could submit photographs to the board, but, that's...
I just want to know if Andy had anything to add there.
Yeah, so looking at the map, there's definitely, the topo looks questionable whether it could be a 5%, handicap accessible is 5% on the sidewalk, and then the topo definitely shows a steep slope, which I'm assuming is the rock ledge Patty's talking about on the southern end that goes right up to the road. So it would be very difficult to build a sidewalk in that location, especially if it's rock. And to answer your question, Patty, it's on Henry Du Bois. New Paltz Storage on Henry Du Bois, right across from Meadowbrook Apartments.
I just want to ask again, if there's no this is old kids, there's no sidewalk anywhere on this road, is that correct? Is that a correct statement?
Correct.
That's
Okay,
the correct statement.
okay. So I guess I feel that just, why you would inject one in, if it was to keep the consistency, I could understand that. Perhaps you want to have an escrow of, some kind of contribution if there were one in the future, but it would seem that it's in character to grant the waiver for this, to eliminate this, not have the sidewalk. If there's nothing else on the street that's like that, it just continues in the character of the street.
If on that point, Jane, I would suggest that an escrow may not be the best way. And the reason for that is, I mean, it's up to the board, but I'm just giving you some input on streets like this that may not get sidewalks in the area for 20, 30 years. To have the village keep track of a relatively small amount of escrow, which at the point in time may not be sufficient in any event to go ahead and build the sidewalk. I think it would be more appropriate if you wanted something, is to have that deed restriction that said, if there were sidewalks placed on either side of these properties, at that point in time, the owner would be required to pay for sidewalks on their property.
Rich, would they pay for it, or would they have to join a sidewalk? What do you call it? Like an area where, like, I live on a street with no sidewalks. I shouldn't be paying for sidewalks in some other area. So I would imagine there's some kind of zoning district where you, like a water district or a streetlight district, where you would pay for the sidewalk as a group, or not?
You wouldn't have to have it. You can have those things. But what this provision requires is that an owner in a subdivision put in the sidewalks at their own expense.
Okay.
And that's what this would require, is that if some trigger, whether that trigger is that there are sidewalks placed on either side of these properties, then at that point in time, they would be obligated under that deed restriction to actually install the sidewalks to meet those adjacent sidewalks that have already been constructed.
So one of the reasons I brought this, I used to live on Huguenot Street for about 40 years, and I walked on Old Kingston Road daily. So I know it's a mile and a half from where I used to live to the end of Old Kingston Road. Huguenot Street is very slow driving. Old Kingston Road, however, the cars go very fast. And sidewalks, maybe they can't go out that far, but would be helpful on that road, in my opinion. I like that motion that you're talking about, Rick. But, I'm okay with the waiver if everybody else wants it that way. So, but I don't mind having it somewhere in there that if the neighbors put sidewalks in, that they have to put a sidewalk in too.
I agree. I like that compromise.
Mhm.
That's 3.
Yep. So do you want to amend the motion or something, or?
Well, Jane, I can't hear you.
Sorry. I'll then amend the motion to say that we do, as Rick suggested, have an amendment to the what is it, the lot line revision, that if in the future that there are sidewalks going in, then that property has to put the sidewalk in as well. Is that
So
right, Rick?
yeah, I think the motion would have to go something along the lines that a motion to eliminate the sidewalks with the condition that prior to the signing of the plans, a deed restriction must be filed with the county clerk, mandating that sidewalks be imposed at such time as sidewalks on either side of these properties are constructed.
Thank you, Rick.
Now I just have to write it down.
Okay, so that motion, do we need a new second? Lyle,
Yes.
you want to second that motion?
No.
You don't?
I'll
Okay,
second.
okay. Is there more discussion on that motion?
Yeah, I
Yes.
have something to say. That deed restriction goes with whoever owns that property, correct?
Yes,
So it may impact the value of that property.
technically, yes.
Okay, just to be clear.
I think it would impact it big time, especially if it has this rock outcrop, that somebody would be required to, the sidewalk on that piece of property might cost a lot more than the sidewalk on the neighbors, So you would basically be holding this, I just think, just a blanket require the sidewalk. I just think that's doesn't seem equitable to me.
If the outcrop is that I mean, prominent, then that's a dangerous place to walk, or you're gonna have to be in the street. If sidewalks eventually go into that area, that would be one of the places you'd want it the most, so that people would not be having to walk out into the street in traffic that Adele was describing.
Okay, well, let's take a vote on that motion. Lyle, you may have convinced me. So the motion is to require, is to have a waiver. Rick, can you reread that?
Sure. A motion to eliminate the sidewalks for this application upon the condition that prior to the signing of the plans, a deed restriction shall be filed with the county clerk in such form as agreeable to the planning board attorney, mandating that sidewalks must be installed at such time that there are constructed sidewalks on either side on the adjoining lots to these properties.
Okay,
Do you want me to do a roll call, Adele?
sure. Thank you.
Okay. So Adele,
So I've changed my mind. I'm going to vote against that motion and for a waiver for the next motion.
okay, Lyle,
No,
Amy,
No.
Matt,
No,
Jane,
No,
Amanda,
Yes,
Stana.
Yes.
Okay, so that's 4 no's, 2 ayes. The motion fails.
Okay. New motion?
I'm not going to do it this time.
can
Well, I guess,
can we make a motion now to give a waiver?
Yeah, I would prefer it.
You can make whatever motion you want.
Right.
It would be better if it was framed in the same language of the code provision, which is eliminate sidewalks. So you would make a motion to eliminate the need for sidewalks on this application.
I just have one question. So if the town decides to put a sidewalk in, they would be taking up some piece of property of the owner. Does waiving this mean we can't do that in the future?
No.
Okay,
This
that's fine.
is just what the planning board has the power to do. The town board has different powers that it can exercise, including eminent domain. But this board is just saying for this application, where there's a requirement of the code to put sidewalks, except if you decide to eliminate them, you're deciding to eliminate them for this particular subdivision application.
and Rick, this doesn't establish any kind of precedent and won't affect our decision on the next thing that comes along, right?
There is no absolute precedent that it sets. However, the planning board is supposed to act similarly in similar situations. So if there was a similar situation going forward, then an applicant would say, listen, this is the same situation as you did before. Unless you can show some distinction, I should get the same treatment.
Okay, should we phrase the motion to include the observed hardship in building a sidewalk?
I think that would be very careful of you to do so.
And I think maybe you would cite 3 of them. 1 would be the topographic and rock conditions. 2 would be the fact that both the lots already exist and we're actually taking 3 lots and reducing them to 2. And the 3rd would be that it is a lot line revision and not a subdivision.
All right, Lyle, go ahead.
I would rather stick with just the hardship. Because I'm not sure that I quite agree with the others, that I believe the lot line is a subdivision according to our code, and that the fact that we're eliminating a lot doesn't carry a lot of weight in my mind. I think it's just the hardship, I think is pretty sufficient.
So it would be owing to the topography and the rock conditions present on site?
Yes. So if we could phrase that into a motion with a little guidance, Rich, that would be helpful.
I think it's as simple as that. I think a motion would be in order to eliminate sidewalks for this application owing to the topography and rock conditions present at the site.
I make that motion then.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any more discussion? All in favor of that motion?
Do you want to do roll call again for that?
I think we are unanimous from what
We're
I see
unanimous?
right here.
Okay.
Dana, your hand up there? Yeah, okay,
Okay, great. Thank you, guys.
thank you. Okay. So now we need, we're up to the resolution. Has anyone have any comments on the resolution?
We just need to read the specific conditions, yay?
Yes, that's how you normally do it. We will fill in before I send it to Alana unless she wants to do it. There's a couple of spots that need some new information with respect to the request for waiver has to be put in there. There was actually a typo on the identification of the plans, number 6. It referenced the last plans being December 17th, 2021. It's 2020. I think you should read. Yeah, I think all you need is the specific conditions of approval. And we will fill in the rest as you've discussed tonight to be consistent with that.
Matt, do you have them?
And then, but Rick, you have to fix that waiver because the language just says the waiver, the sidewalks waived.
Yeah, I'll fix it to be consistent with the board's resolution.
Okay,
Or actually, John is going to do that and finalize the resolution and send it on to Alana.
Matt, yes?
Yeah, I have the resolution.
Okay. Do you
I
want to
can't
read
see you at the same time. So am I making a motion to pass the draft resolution and then read the specific
Typically,
conditions?
it's the other way around, Matt. Typically, you
Okay.
say, we have a resolution before us, and these are the specific conditions, and then you say, and I move that we pass the resolution as discussed.
Is there anyone that can read that resolution on the
I can.
board while you have to get off to do that, Matt? Is it what you're saying?
No.
No, I
can
think Matt's
find it.
just saying that it takes up the visual part when he brings
Oh,
up the
okay.
resolution.
Okay,
Right, Matt?
Yes, I'm just gonna read the specific conditions. Is that okay?
yes.
Okay, so the specific conditions for 290 Old Kingston Road, lot line revision, by this resolution of approval, the planning board is not approving the use or the propriety of the location of the shed located on the existing parcel identified as section 78.15, block 1, lot 22. Said shed must comply with all town of New Paltz code requirements, including permitting and setback distances. Specific condition number 2, prior to the signing of the plot, the applicant must provide evidence of a document being recorded with the Ulster County Clerk, evidencing that the existing driveway easement has been extinguished. So other than those specific conditions, I move that the draft resolution be passed.
Yes.
I second that.
Okay. Any discussion on the resolution? All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Bye.
That's all. That's unanimous, right?
I
Thank
didn't
you
see-
very-
Amanda, did I see you? Did you raise your hand, Amanda?
I'm all like goofed up here somehow. I
Amanda,
don't
are you
seem,
voting no?
I don't seem to be on Zoom anymore or something.
No, you're there. We see.
Oh,
You're
okay.
here.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you. I said yes.
You said yes?
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's unanimous.
Okay, Patty, I just want to
Yes.
make sure you can work with Andy on this. Since this is modifying property lines, I assume that you are putting together some sort of subdivision plat to be signed and then filed with the county. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
So the plat that we submitted is the lot line revision plat that shows the lot lines to be removed, has the proper endorsement blocks, and that is what we will be asking the chairperson to sign and will be filing with the county clerk.
Okay, just.
The applicant was in the office today. He showed me a copy of the driveway maintenance agreement with the original signatures. Unfortunately, I was out in the field when he arrived, so I did not get that to Andy before, or you, actually, before tonight's meeting. But that will be filed before we submit the plat for final signature.
All right, the other thing that I think should be done when you're finalizing it, to avoid a note, an explanatory note, I think you should just get rid of that shed on the plan. Because if you have that shed shown, then you're going to have a note on there saying that the approval of this and the signing of this plat is not approving that particular shed. So my preference is.
And I do have that note on the plat right now. I'm not allowed by law to remove it as a licensed land surveyor. It's there, and I would be negligent if I omitted something. I could be censured for that. I can't pretend something doesn't exist.
No, it wasn't that. It was more for just purposes of adjusting a lot line. I'm not aware of a requirement of the county to go ahead and do that, but I'm fine with having the note there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My land surveying, it requires that we show anything within the property or within 2 feet of a boundary line. That's our code of practice that the state education department requires that we show. So I'm not allowed by law to remove that.
All right,
or omit it, I guess.
Rick, there's a note number 9 says the non-conforming shed on lot 1 is not part of this lot line revision map and shall be remedied through zoning board or building department as required.
Yeah, I think you need to say something more in that note saying that has not been approved.
Yeah, I again, not being an attorney, I try to use my lay person's terminology. If you have a suggestion for revising that note in a way that you think would protect the municipality in a better way, I'm more than happy.
I think the condition in the resolution would cover it.
Okay.
Where it says.
Yeah, I was trying to be redundant with the resolution just to, add something extra on the plat as well, so that somebody didn't have to go back to the town minutes to read it.
No, I'm saying
maybe I created a problem by adding something.
Right.
So are you suggesting I just get rid of the note altogether?
No, I think you should have the note closer to what the specific condition number 1 says.
Okay. Okay, once I get a copy of that resolution, I will make the note change on the map and then run it by you before we run the final prints.
Sounds good.
And I usually just send it to me, Patty, as a final check in PDF, and then before you print the Mylars, and Rick will take a look.
Perfect. That works. I appreciate the time and effort that the board put into the thought of the sidewalks this evening. I know it was a difficult exercise, and I do appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Thank you. Thanks, Patty. Okay, we're all set?
All righty.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
See you on the next one.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. So, all right. Next on the agenda, we have a guest, Michael Dupree, who's the chairperson for the Hyde Park Planning Board. Welcome.
Adele, I'd actually like to maybe start this off, ask David Brownstein, who's with us, if he'd like to say a few words on, from the town board perspective of why we're here tonight. And then I have a brief presentation I'd like to give reviewing our proposal, and then Michael can speak.
Great, thank you, Ingrid, and thank you to the planning board for being here and putting this on the agenda for today. Just really quick, because I want to leave it to Ingrid and Michael. Michael came, Ingrid and Michael came to a town board meeting in December, discussed how critical environmental areas were working in Hyde Park. And without speaking for all the members of the town board, I think we were all pretty moved and feeling positive toward critical environmental areas and establishing some. Since that meeting, Ingrid and I and the supervisor have worked on redefining some of the critical environmental areas and limiting a few of them, at least initially. And we really wanted to bring Michael to the planning board to discuss a little bit more about how critical environmental areas were working, because the last discussion we had felt like there was a fair amount of confusion around how they're working in other areas. So we wanted to move on this. So with that, Ingrid, I'm going to let you take over and talk about where we are on the critical environmental areas, and then hear from Michael. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. And thank you, members of the planning board, for your time this evening, and for the members of the town board who are with us. And of course, thank you to Michael Dupre for your generous time tonight. So I wanted to briefly respond to some of the concerns raised by the planning board in your memo in response to the critical environmental areas proposal. And I'm hoping that Michael can help answer some questions you have relating to kind of the practical implementation of CEAs on a planning board level. So to recap, CEAs are areas with exceptional or unique environmental characteristics that local governments may designate under seeker. The CEA designation requires that the planning board consider how a proposed development may affect the qualities of the designated area. And in that way, it ensures that these features aren't overlooked during environmental reviews and that any potentially harmful impacts to them are considered and evaluated. They don't protect land. They're not designed to prevent development in these areas. They don't restrict development or regulate it in the way that zoning does. The CEA designation also doesn't require that additional studies be completed to evaluate a project, though the planning board may choose to request more information as they can for any project undergoing environmental review. CEA designation is a way of raising awareness early in the planning process that there are unique environmental features present that the town is concerned about, so that applicants can identify and address them in their plans. By providing this information up front, it also arguably saves time for applicants and encourages more proactive consideration of these resources. It will also help create a more predictable environmental review process. So we brought this proposal to the town board, and they opened a public hearing back in February, which of course was interrupted by the COVID lockdown in March. We came back to the town board in December, as David said, and have urged a renewed look at the proposal. The ENCB also decided to reduce the scope of the project from 6 proposed areas down to 4 to address concerns about the size. So the proposal is now focused on the Shawangum Ridge, Wallkill River and Kleinkill corridor, Clearwater Woods, and the Plutarch Woods and wetlands. And we still think that the Swartikill wetlands and the Stony Kill Woods warrant the designation, but we're choosing to focus on the areas that we feel are most compelling in their significance and of greatest vulnerability. If it's possible, Alana, I'd like to share my screen.
You should be able to, like last time.
All right, great. So I have put together a couple of maps I wanted to share, and let's see. Hopefully you can see this all right. Does this look okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yep, okay. So these are the 4 areas that we're currently proposing in the revised proposal. The areas total 7,908 acres in extent, which is about 38% of the town's land area. However, of that area, about 2,963 acres are already publicly owned or protected. And 1,906 acres are subject to the town's floodplain regulations or wetland and watercourse protection law. And that leaves about 3,661 acres that are not currently regulated or protected under those provisions. So the areas that are not in yellow here is kind of what's remaining in these CEAs. And I note that none of the CEAs are in commercial zoning districts. So this proposal should not have any impact on commercial development in New Paltz. So the remaining land here is roughly 17.7% of the town land area. So that's a much smaller area than we were, originally talking about. So I'm just going to walk through a couple of these areas and talk about their significance. And beginning with the Shangam Ridge, and I'm not going to say too much about it because I think there's pretty widespread acknowledgement, understanding about the ecological significance of the ridge. It's considered one of the highest priorities for conservation in the northeastern United States, let alone in New York. And about half of the ridge, the area shown kind of in white hatch here, is already protected primarily by the Mohonk Preserve. The ridge is one of two significant biodiversity areas in New Paltz, and these that are recognized by the DEC. And these are areas that have high concentrations of documented rare species and state significant ecosystems and other unique ecological features present. And so that includes the Shangam Ridge, as well as this area on the eastern side of the Thruway, which is part of the Esopus-Lloyd Wetlands and Ridges significant biodiversity area. And the area outlined in red here is the second CEA we're talking about, which is the Plutarch Woods and Wetlands. And this area is, so this is just showing the framework that designation is based on. It's roughly where we are here in New Paltz with these two significant biodiversity areas. So these are just 2 of 22 such areas in the Hudson Valley region. They're not everywhere. They're pretty unique. This Plutarch Woods and Wetlands area is also recognized by the Nature Conservancy as a matrix forest block. This is an analysis that was done for the entire northeastern United States to identify the largest, most intact forest ecosystems. They're exceptionally significant for kind of the quality of interior forest habitat and connectedness of the forests, which are important to many species of wildlife. And in addition, so this is just zooming out to the regional scale, roughly again where New Paltz is, showing where we are, and there are 19 of these matrix forests, the dark green areas in the Hudson Valley, Hudson River Estuary watershed. So the Wallkill River and Kleinkill Corridor CEA focuses on this connection between the ridge and the river provided by this natural area. It continues north along the Wallkill in an area that has pretty extensive floodplain forest and upland forest that help to attenuate impacts of major floods along the Wallkill. And the purple area is the Clearwater Woods CEA, which is a large intact forest area between Route 32 and the Thruway. And both this area and the Wallkill River and Kleinkill Corridor support rare turtles and bird species. And I wanted to show you that, in addition to, they have the Wallkill and Kleinkill Corridor and Clearwater Woods are significant in their own right, but I think they have exceptional significance because of their role in providing habitat connectivity, both in New Paltz between the ridge and the major forests on the eastern side of the town. And this is significant at a regional scale and arguably beyond. So this is showing the lighter green areas are what were referred to as a forest linkage zone or corridor, an analysis identifying connections between those large forest blocks at a statewide level. Even in national scale analyses, these are intact core habitat areas ranked by their importance for habitat connectivity at a national scale. And the dark green areas are the highest, kind of most significant corridors for movement between large intact habitats. That was completed by ESRI, that's the major GIS software company, which has taken a big interest in green infrastructure planning. And this area also shows up as a highly resilient area for biodiversity in a changing climate. This connectivity is especially important when we think about our rapidly warming climate and the need for species to migrate and adapt as their habitat conditions are changing. And the only way they can do so is if we allow for maintaining that connectivity. And New Paltz happens to have this important connection between the large intact forests of the Shangam Ridge and the large intact forests of the Esopus-Lloyd wetlands area and the Plutarch Woods and Wetlands. And I just wanted to show as well that there's lots of natural heritage data from the state Natural Heritage Program for rare animals located in these areas that warrants consideration as well. So these are just some of the sources of information we looked at in designating these areas, but I hope it gives you a better idea of why we consider these large features to be unique and exceptional in New Paltz. And we're not alone in designating large forest areas and wildlife corridors as critical environmental areas. This is a map again showing those corridors and matrix forests, and the purple areas are designated critical environmental areas. This one that I'm waving my cursor over in Woolworthing was just designated last year. That is the Catskill-Shangam Greenway corridor, and it was designated specifically because of that same reason of identifying it as important linkage between the Catskill Forest and the Shangam Ridge. Michael can talk briefly about Hogback Hill, which is here in Hyde Park, and there are others over in Pine Plains and town of Washington and Dutchess County, where they designated a large Sissing Mountain area as a major forest that was designated as a CEA. I know that Michael's time is limited this evening, and I want to give him some time to share his experiences. So I had some ideas myself that I wanted to share about the practical implications of using these CEAs, but I think I'll stop there and introduce Michael. Michael Dupre is the chairman of the Town of Hyde Park Planning Board, which he joined 15 years ago. He was involved in the designation of 4 CEAs in Hyde Park around that time. Mr. Dupre has also served on the Dutchess County Planning Board since 2012 and is chair of the Board of Trustees at Dutchess County Community College. He is retired from a career in writing and editing, and I just want to thank you again, Michael, for sharing your time with us tonight.
Thank you, Ingrid. Members of the board and consultants, thank you. It's a pleasure to appear before you. And Councilman Brownstein, good to see you again. Happy New Year to all of you. I apologize if you saw any of the remarks I made to the town board if I'm redundant, but I think Ingrid called me in because there was concern expressed by members of your board about the implementation and possibly overburdening somehow future development. So Ingrid, I don't know if you can possibly call up the Hogback Hill Critical Environmental Area map that's on the Town of Hyde Park website. But that's, if you can share the screen with that one, it's a great way to explain why we did it in the first place. Because it shows that there are other areas beyond just the critical environmental area that we could have also sort of included, but chose not to. And why we chose not to, I think will maybe allay some of those fears you had. But first in advance, I do want to tell you that this is my 16th year chairing the planning board, and we consider ourselves a pro-development board. In my 16 years of experience, we've turned down exactly 1 application. And to be honest with you, that application couldn't meet the criteria of a very specific overlay district. It's a planned development district. So if you see the different colors of the area and the legend, where you see the rare plants, rare animal areas that are both significant, that are both isolated, and then you see the blue significant community, that represents areas where you kind of have a convergence of all of your features, both rare animals and rare plants. And when I first joined the board, back then we had lots of development pressure for housing. We had over 3,500 housing units proposed north of where you can see Hudson Drive down there. And one of the problems was that all the developers were seeing, they were buying, or project sponsors, I should say, they were buying parcels of land and saying, okay, my allowed density is 72 units. Let's try to get all 72 on there, without really understanding that in many cases, the land was constrained by environmental resources. So one of the things we chose to do, working with a grant from the DEC's estuary program, people at Hudsonia, 3 of us from the planning board and members of our Conservation Advisory Council, which is your ENCB, worked for 9 months to establish this, went out in the field, did examinations, looked at previous studies on prior applications, and came up with the map. And the reason why we did this was to us, it's a way to give the project sponsors, the development community, an idea in advance of even purchasing the land or beginning to do a layout and spending all that money with engineers to say, hey, take a look first to see where there might be areas that might be more constrained. There might be not just wetlands, but vernal pools, intermittent streams that provide movement for endangered, threatened, and rare species. I know, and I said this before to the town board, in your community, you're looking often more at natural resources. We already have viewshed overlays here that protect some of our ridge lines, et cetera. So for us, it was a way to take a look at the more environmentally sensitive features of the land. And again, Hyde Park is either blessed or cursed, depending on which side you're looking at, to be one of the repositories, one of the few in the state of the Blanding's turtle. It's an endangered species, both federally and national. We also have the standard Indiana bat and northern long-eared bats. So this was a way to us to provide not a red flag, as I said before, but as a way to guide development in advance of people just saying, looking down and thinking, I can get all the density that I'm allowed, because that's not really how it's going to work. As I also often say to the development community, whom I work well with, most of the land that could be easily developed in Hyde Park was developed a long time ago. I also told the town board that, and if you look, you see where the orange areas are, that's what we put in as our critical environmental area. You'll notice that the area to the right or to the east, and also to the east and the north, if Ingrid would go up that way, those areas for rare animals extend, but they don't have the same concentration of environmental resources. So for us, this is a way to tell the development community, these areas are the most important and probably worthy of most preservation. The other areas, as they extend over to the east, those are areas where we know that there are known sightings of Blanding's turtles. So we're going to require some kind of endangered, threatened, and rare species habitat assessment, et cetera. And I believe that I had heard, you know, by reputation, that your board already takes a good look at these kinds of things. And there was some worry that somehow this was almost an insult to your board by accusing you of not doing enough work. But again, to us in Hyde Park, that's not really what it means. It's about a way to give a heads up to developers, to the development community, that if you think you can get 72 houses, good luck. We'll try to work with you, but it may be difficult given the constraints on your parcel. That noted, one particular site, and I hadn't thought about it to discuss earlier with the town board, we have a 200-acre parcel that's now in this. At the time, it was not. And a developer who split this time between Israel and Westchester had purchased it thinking, I can get the 72 homes on it that I want. Once we referred it, we went through several iterations of trying to design and work with him. Once we sent it to the DEC, they more or less opined that he could get 26 at the max. Had we already had these kinds of maps, because it's a big parcel where it's half blue and half of the sort of olivey green color, he would have known in advance it probably wasn't going to get 72. I don't know how much he spent, but I'm going to guess in soft costs, it was above probably 300,000. I don't like to see money wasted that way. I'd rather see it spent in something that's more productive, like housing, sidewalks, as you were just discussing, along roadsides, better drainage districts, et cetera. So again, for us, this was just a way to sort of be a helpful tool. And thus far, that's how it's worked. We did have a more recent application for a solar farm. We were the first in our county to write a law sort of defining all of what we needed in a solar farm application, so they wouldn't have to come in through the public utility use under site plans, because there's too much in site plan that doesn't apply to solar farms. And one proposal was made right in where there's a blue area. They hadn't looked at the map because they weren't sure how the DEC would handle the sort of tension between the governor's edict that we need to have a lot more solar farms, wind farms, et cetera, to meet the goals that he's established to go more carbon neutral, meaning they were actually proposing putting solar panels within wetlands. It was at the edge, but definitely within the, well, outside, within the wetland itself, outside of the adjacent, 100-foot adjacent area. And we finally sent it over to the DEC, sort of curious as, you know, where do they come down? And they more or less said the project probably can't be mitigated. So it was withdrawn by the applicant based on that. So that's kind of an overview. of where we were. Again, we think it's a helpful development tool, but I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have. And by the way, I don't have a time constraint. Over here on our side of the river, we like to call ourselves land use junkies, where we go, land use. And I'm one of those. So I'm happy to stay as long as you'd like, et cetera. Thank you.
So are there any questions from our board members for Michael? Okay, so Michael, what percentage of land is in your CIA of your township?
So this is a little over 6,000 acres, and that represents approximately 5%.
Mhm.
The other ones are all smaller because they're in sensitive areas along the river. So probably in total, because we're a large community, it's about, it totals about 10%. That noted, I should add that there are other areas that we would have put into critical environmental areas, but we have a large presence of state and federal parks and historic sites. I have over 4,000 acres. That's the Mills Norrie State Park. That's in effect already conserved. Those are areas that we know have lots of endangered, threatened, and rare species, as well as sensitive ridgelines. We also have over 8,000 of federal. So there are areas that we didn't have to take a look at. I'll also add, and I mentioned this at the town board meeting, there's an area that's opposite it's a 339 acre parcel across from the Culinary Institute. The rear portion of that is known to have Blanding's turtles. It's a complex interconnected series of high quality vernal pools, intermittent streams. But the town board and our comprehensive plan took a look at that one parcel and decided that that should be commercial development. So when we were going through, we deliberately chose not to take a look at that because in truth, our board tends to believe that you have to have commercial somewhere. If a town board says this is where the commercial should be, then that's where we're going to be, and we're going to work to mitigate any impacts on sensitive features there. So what we've done with working with the applicant, and this is the second applicant I've been working with, where he's finally changing the concept plan from what was approved back in 2006. But that back area, which represents a significant portion, is just going to be left completely alone because the DEC probably wouldn't allow it, but also they're going to use it for passive recreation. It's going to be a large development of, they're calling it an agri-hood. So it's dining, farming, et cetera. It's maybe a little bit trendy, but that's where the market is right now. And it's designed to attract tourists. So they're taking advantage of the fact that the more sensitive areas will only have very passive recreation. And the site will, out of the 339 acres, they're going to wind up leaving approximately 58% is open, conserved open space.
Is that owned by the Culinary Institute?
No. It was
Okay.
owned by the president of the Culinary Institute for a long time.
Okay.
He went bankrupt and it was sold. It went into foreclosure to the county and they put it up for bids and it's now owned by Tom Mulroy, who is an investor in Silo Ridge, which is one of our big developments further east of me.
So, Mr. Dupree, when did you actually put these CEAs in place?
2009.
Okay. And how many projects have you had that fell into them?
There were a lot of those. So I don't know what it's like. Let me start over again. Number one, we don't have the compact design New Paltz has. Whenever I go into communities like yours, I jaw drop with envy because Hyde Park was dominated by 3 or 4 large historic estates that went from the river all the way east. And the town did not have zoning until 1974. And after the implementation of income tax, lots of these large estates, this includes Vanderbilt and the FDR, portions of them were sold. Because we didn't have zoning, we just had subdivision law, they got subdivided. And I have long linear town without really a compact center. So most of what you see, the projects that were impacted, by the time that we adopted the CEA, most of them had been withdrawn because the Great Recession, I guess it's still called, had hit, and there wasn't a demand for all the housing. So almost all of them withdrew. The only one that didn't is the big one that I was sort of saying it's a 200 acre parcel that abuts onto Albany Post Road. And he has never withdrew that. He came back with a couple of other ideas. And then when the DEC basically said you get 26 houses, he couldn't really make a go of it. So we don't have any active applications except for the more recent solar farm law that's there.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Dupree? Okay,
You can say
well,
Michael, you can say Michael, by the way. And
Michael, I think I did once, but I
it's
forgot.
okay. I should add that when I went on your website to look to see the agenda, et cetera, I have to tell you, I'm really impressed. I have the only female majority town board and planning board in the county. And I looked and I was like, wait a minute, do I see 5 women's names on here? That's over where I am over on this side. That's really progressive, I want to tell you. And just listening to your conversation tonight, I see you're a really engaged board. So it's a pleasure watching you and listening to you. Any other questions?
Thank you. Thanks so much. That's great.
Then you're welcome. It's a pleasure. And again, Happy New Year. Thanks, Ingrid.
Happy New Year. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Ingrid, did you want to, where are you? There you are. You moved.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you want to add something to that, Ingrid?
So I wanted to add a few things just with regards to the concerns about practical implications. I think that it's important to note the town is in the process of creating a comprehensive natural resources inventory and accompanying online map that will contain all the data that are used to justify these critical environmental areas. And that will make it very easy to refer back to that information in the process of reviewing applications in these areas and to describe the resources that are present on the site in relation to the justification for these CEAs. And the ENCB could assist the planning board with that task. The NRI is of course supposed to be completed within a couple of months. I also think pre-application meetings could be encouraged for projects in CEA areas or required for projects of a certain size to discuss any of these issues up front with applicants. And of course, if the planning board determines that some habitat or ecological assessment is warranted, the CEA documentation would help to better focus those studies on the known resources of concern in these areas. And in the case of subdivisions, CEA designation can also help with identifying the most important natural resources on the site in determining which areas should be set aside for conservation under the cluster subdivision regulations in the town. So those were just a few additional ideas I had about how this could be a really helpful tool for the planning board in helping to raise awareness about these unique areas in New Paltz and guiding future development to avoid or minimize the impacts to them.
So Mike, I have a question. So what prevents us from asking applicants to, why do we need to designate? Rather than saying, okay, this is a sensitive area, it's not designated, but we want this information and we do it all the time. So what I'd like to hear is why we need to designate an entire area, because unless I misunderstood what Michael said, he's really not getting any applications in those areas except for one. So I think people are shying away, and we're talking about a much larger area, I think, of putting in applications because they're afraid that it's designated a certain way. I'm not opposed to this. I just want to hear why it's important, why you think it's important to have this when we still have all of those tools in front of us and we can ask for all of these consultants to come in and do the same work.
Well, first off, I think there have been projects proposed in those areas, and there have been since the designation was completed in Hyde Park. And I think part of the fact is that part of the reason those areas were designated is because there are real environmental constraints and habitat for threatened species that restricts how those areas can be developed. But in this case here, I think it's much harder. This is my observation, is that it's much harder for you as a planning board to ask an applicant to redesign their project after they put together, they've already have a vision of what they can do. They put together a site plan, come to you, and suddenly you say, oh, you happen to be in this very important large forest area, and we're concerned about the fragmentation of this forest, and so forth. Well, if they had known about that earlier in the planning process, probably would have been more likely to plan their project in a way that would consider that. I just think there's importance in making an official designation that these are areas that are considered by the town to be significant. And I don't think applicants will take them seriously in the same way when they're not. And the fact is that our town has recognized these areas as significant in our open space plan. Many of these areas were recommended, for this designation in our comprehensive plan from 1995. And I think that there's a challenge in getting that information through to applicants, and I think this doesn't restrict or prevent development in these areas. It's not what it's designed to do. It's designed to ensure that they're considered, that these issues are brought up early on, and that they're part of the evaluation during seeker.
So I feel that, the ridge is the ridge all by itself, in my opinion. And that's something that, if I were looking at it, I would say, okay, that's very important. But some of the other areas, if an applicant sees that it's a CEA, they're gonna go, oh my God, we're not even gonna go near it. Whereas they could come before us for a pre-application consultation with or without consultants to know and find out that these areas are sensitive. But I think it's going to, I just think that designating such a big chunk of New Paltz is going to deter applicants. I understand what you're saying. It shouldn't, but it will. And I don't know. Does anyone else have an opinion?
Adele, I want to point out what the chair of Hyde Park's planning board said, as well as what Ingrid pointed to just now, which is that this could actually save applicants time and money. I do see how that is valuable in knowing some of what to expect beforehand. Rather than us have them come before us and they're having to pay for consultants and whatever, like let them know ahead of time, give them a heads up. And it sounds to me like it hasn't necessarily, we can't know for certain, but it doesn't, I don't see how we necessarily know that this is going to deter people from wanting to try to do things. I see it as actually helping applicants in the future.
Okay, anyone else on the planning board want to comment? Jane.
I have a couple of comments. First of all, I used to live in the Plutarch area, the Plutarch shed area, and we saw the turkeys every October, and the red fox and the turtles. We had to be careful not to kill them. We had Bob the black snake, who would, because we had the Swartikill behind us, who would curl himself and scare the hell out of the contractors. And I lived there for 12 years, so I am familiar with what one of these, these places are, these habitats are like. And I also, last year when this came before our board, and we were, I did talk, I think you may remember, Ingrid, I called you and we had a very long talk about this whole thing, because I did take a look at the map. I wanted to understand it and hear from you, what was important about it. And when we gave our comments to the town board, I said at the time, and I have not changed my opinion, that I favor immediate adoption of the Ridge as a CEA with the criteria, obvious, all the tweaks that we would have to do with the code, and so that it's specific and so forth. I think that's just a no-brainer. But I do think that there's a difference between 10% of the town and 38% of the town, particularly with the other areas that are affected outside that, firmly defined 38%. And I have to say, I feel this, I'm a little bit mystified at why this feels a little handed down. It's like, I kind of feel that there's this feeling that the planning board needs to have our consciousness raised about this. And we deal with this in seeker, we deal with this on site visits. There was a house on just right up against the ridge where they wanted to put a swimming pool. We went out there, we spent an hour walking around there and trying to figure out, because it was in such a sensitive area. I just think that to take this and expand it to 38%, and I think that's I think that's an improvement over 40%. I think that we need a referendum on it. I think everybody kind of has to understand what it is. It's very worthy, it's very right thinking, it's very conscious, and we're all conscious of all the things we have to do in the environment. But I do honestly feel, we are very, very careful. Amanda, who's, knows so much about this on our board, really is our guide on this. And I'm starting to kind of feel a little coerced about it. And I don't understand why we have to feel that, why I have to feel that way. I think that we're pretty consistent, and we've had this tangle of consultants. Consultants have consultants, hundreds of dollars an hour. The idea that anybody has to, just an average homeowner, people, the kinds of people we've had appear before our planning board. One older couple that just wanted to build an accessory apartment, their English wasn't very good. People struggle to deal with the restrictions and the requirements of the town, the planning board. I could only name 3 applicants that really handled it pretty easily without spending tens of thousands of dollars for consultants to come and, cut through all of it. People sit there perplexed. And I just think that we're here to serve people. We're not here to rule over them and give them, things that make them jump through hoops with their property. I just think that we have to be a little bit also concerned with the impact this has on people who just have a regular, $250,000 or $300,000 house that happens to be in one of these areas. And we just can't put extra burden on them wanting to do, to expand it or build something or have an accessory apartment. It doesn't feel, it doesn't feel kind of right to me, even though it's worthy, it's all right thinking. And, I agree, as I said, immediately. Also, this isn't our decision. This is the town board's decision. If they're going to decide it, then decide it. We'll enforce the code. We'll do what we have to do. We'll do all, I'll check all the boxes, but somebody's got to speak for, I think, the average people here in town that may not even be aware. So I've gone on too long. I'm sorry. I'll go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to,
Can I
no,
respond
hold
to
off for a
some of her?
second, Ingrid. Lyle, do you want to say something?
I would just say the same thing, that I feel like we do a very in-depth job on every application. And if it was just the CEA area alone, that would be one thing. But I think the way it's written is if there's one nearby, you have to deal with the issues. So I think that if the town wants to put it in and do it, let them do it. But I think we do a good job. I do think that Ingrid's idea of having a pre-meeting I don't know how we would ever enforce that when we don't even have an application before us, but I would encourage anybody. And I don't think it should just be between a few individuals on off hours or during the day. I think it should be a regular planning board open hearing. Let everybody talk about their concerns for the property.
Okay, thank you. So anybody else on the planning board want to weigh in? No, Rick, what do you think? Do you want to say something also?
Well, it's a policy issue for the town board as to what they want to do. And I have no problem with CEAs generally. They're there to protect unique areas. The one thing that I guess I have one clarification for Ingrid and a couple of comments, but the clarification is that I thought there was one slide that said that the private remaining land that's being regulated by these CEAs was something like 1,300 acres or something. But as I understood that, that was net of areas in the town that are presently regulated by other regulations. But it's not that those areas aren't going to be regulated by CEA. So this is just an additional regulation on top of those other regulations. Is that correct?
Well,
Like
I think this
floodplains
is-
in other areas.
I think this is arguably not a regulation because it does not actually restrict your land use in any way or create any new jurisdiction. It simply requires there be consideration during the seeker process. It's one more question on the EAF form for the projects that are subject to seeker. But just to get back to the statistics, so the amount of land total in the revised proposal is 7,908 acres. And of that, 2,963 acres are already protected or owned publicly.
Right.
So there was additional acreage that is regulated by the floodplain regulations or by the wetland and watercourse law. And that statistic for 17% was the remaining land in the CEAs that are kind of not currently regulated under one of those other laws or
But the
not
CEAs
currently
are going to
protected.
the CEAs are going to apply to those other regulated areas.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I just wanted clarification on it, that's all.
Mhm.
The only thing that I would say is that, and this is very much from a legal point of view and not from an environmental point of view. From a legal point of view, there are numerous criteria that are in each of these critical environmental areas. There is no doubt from a legal point of view that the planning board must address each and every one of those criteria. They have to, because there is a statement there that this is a critical area where these particular criteria need to be addressed. If the planning board does not address them in a reasoned elaboration, then they can be easily charged with being arbitrary and capricious for failing to address that issue. Now that is whatever it is. It just means that they have to go through this. And I would advise them, if they fail to go through that checklist on each one, that they run the risk of being challenged by somebody who doesn't want that to go forward. And they say, well, you have a procedural misstep in that you failed to address an issue that was identified as being important in the critical environmental area. And it is what it is. I mean, there's lots of things that are known by the planning board that they have to do the same thing on. This just provides additional issues that have to be addressed. It's neither good nor bad. It just is what has to happen as a consequence of it. And then the other is, obviously, there's a lot more reviews by the Environmental Conservation Board, because every property that's within the critical environmental areas or adjacent to those environmental areas has to be referred to the ENCB for their review on top of the planning board review. But those are the only comments I have. I mean, other than that, I'm concerned with respect to making sure that the planning board has to now look at each of the criteria that's in a critical environmental area relevant to a particular piece of property. They cannot ignore it or just say, well, that doesn't apply. They have to give a reasoned elaboration as under seeker as to why they're not addressing that particular issue. And then they have to address each and every one of the ones that do apply. And that's just, you know, if the town board decides that that's what they want the planning board to do, it's certainly, that's just, as Jane said, that's just another regulation and they'll deal with it.
So would you say, Rick, that it's likely or not likely that this is going to be a more expensive process for applicants? Because the Michael suggested that it wouldn't be because they'll know right up front what's going on. I was thinking it would be because we have to go through all these steps.
The people that, I think he mentioned there were 50 applications or something that were withdrawn. So obviously it's cheaper for them not to go through a review if they're not going through a review. I don't know what they're going to do, but it's not more expensive for them. On each particular project, some of them, the difference in expense would be minimal. Other projects, the difference in expense, I think, would be more substantial. It really would depend upon each individual one. But there is no doubt that each of the criteria that's listed, and I have said this from the very beginning when the CEAs originally came up a number of years ago, that I thought that Ingrid did and whoever was working with her on the committee, et cetera, did a very good job of putting together appropriate criteria for each of these areas to establish an entitlement to be able to establish CEAs under the seeker regs. I mean, generally under the regs. And so I think those are appropriate, but it just means that now the planning board has to address each and every one of those. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it will take some additional time. A lot of those you won't need an additional consultant for, and so there may not be much of an added expense. Some of those, in order for you to have a reasoned elaboration to address them, you may have to have a consultant deal with them. So it really depends so much, Adele, on the individual application.
Okay, Matt, you have nothing? Okay, Amy? No? Okay, Amanda? Okay, so is it appropriate that we have a motion on what we would recommend to the town board, do you think?
May I have a chance to respond, Adele?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to a couple of the comments. First, I apologize for any members that feel that this has been handed down to them and that that you're having your arm twisted or feeling coerced about this. I really made my best effort in working on this proposal to engage the planning board, and I'm sorry if it was not enough. We first came up with this concept in a PACE Land Use Leadership Alliance training that was attended by some members of the town board, planning board, and environmental conservation board in 2018. We began working on the proposal then. We presented it to your board in 2019. I met with Adele at that time. We took your comments into consideration in revising the proposal that we brought forward to the town board last fall. So so we certainly were attempting to engage with the planning board early on in developing this proposal, and so it was never my intention to make you feel that way. I also want to say that I think it's important to acknowledge that most property owners in New Paltz would never be affected by this designation. The projects that are subject to seeker review are fairly limited. It does not apply to the typical person owning an average home, wanting to build a shed or add an accessory apartment on their home. Those sorts of actions are not subject to seeker. and therefore this designation does not apply. So I think that's important to note, that it is, things like subdivision of land, building of larger housing developments, and that would be primarily affected by this. Again, the planning board retains full discretion over the way that you conduct seeker. Seeker requires you to make a reasoned elaboration about potential impacts in these areas. The specific questions it asks, and these are in the EAF workbooks, described in the EAF workbooks, are whether the proposed action may result in a reduction of the quantity or quality of the CEA or result in some other impact. And if the answer to any of those three questions is yes, then the planning board must determine the magnitude of the impact. So there needs to be some documentation in terms of the answer to that question, but it does not necessitate, automatically that additional studies be done. I would also note that many of the larger projects that are subject to seeker would already have some sort of ecological assessment being completed routinely as part of their submission, and that this is an opportunity to focus that assessment on the particular resources that we know occur in these areas that are significant, rather than kind of the routine, like limited to threatened and endangered species presence sort of thing. So I think this could help to tailor those studies to be more useful to your board. I also, in terms of the question of a referendum, the designation of CEAs is described in seeker regulations. It doesn't even require the passage of a law. The town board must post public notice of these of the designation, and there has to be a public hearing. The town board can pass a resolution establishing these areas. It doesn't create a new law in New Paltz. They are filed with the DEC and they become part of an official map. As far as Attorney Golden's concerns about the criteria that need to be addressed, my recommendation based on this discussion and the previous one is I think that the way we wrote the proposal caused a lot of confusion around those criteria, which were designed to help clarify kind of like what the planning board might do with this information, not to create design standards that have to be implemented in those areas, which is not the function of a CEA. So I would recommend removing those from the proposal. And in reality, what gets filed with the DEC when these areas are designated is simply the map and the justification of the area that gets boiled down to a few keywords, like this is important because it's wildlife habitat or large forest or wetland resource or something like that. That's kind of the extent of what gets saved in DEC's database. So I think that having the detailed description of the resources that are present is what is valuable. And that's what should be considered when new projects are proposed and evaluated in these areas. And lastly, I'll just say that, with regard to the reviews by ENCB, we're already being referred these projects routinely. So I don't think this would change the ENCB's role in reviews in any way from the way we have been reviewing projects, at least in the last 5 years that I've been involved. Lastly, I would say that I think from conversations with Michael Dupre in Town Park, in the Hyde Park example, he has just emphasized how developers really like to have predictability, and that how having this information up front makes the process more predictable, that there is the known issues are being raised and early on and not being brought up later in the review process. Again, thank you for your time, and I appreciate the time you've put into reviewing and considering and providing feedback.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Do you think it's appropriate to make a recommendation at this time, Rick, to the town board from the planning board? You don't, Jane is shaking her head. Does anyone else want to do that? No comment? You don't want to do that.
I kind of think it's, I don't know, it's a tough one. I kind of think it's the town board's responsibility. I hate to put it off on them, independent of us, but it's really not our decision.
Okay, so we can, without a vote, if you want to talk about it, I think that we can still spend a few minutes talking about it. Lyle, and Jane, if anyone else wants to talk about it. I mean, I have a concern about people that live in this area that have large pieces of land that think it's valuable. The fact that 50 applicants pull their applications. I think when you talk about having your property devalued, I think that this is one way that someone might feel that their property is going to be devalued, much more than a sidewalk. Someone has a piece of land that could be developed in a good way. I think that this is just too much, too big a tract. I would like to see them just start with the ridge, see how it goes. Start with the ridge. The ridge is really a very special section of our town. But that's what I would personally like to see.
So I think it's unfortunate that Michael Dupre left, because maybe we could clarify. I thought he said there was something about the economy also being a part of that about the time they put the CEAs in place was also when there was a big economic downturn. So I'm not sure. It would be nice for him to tell us how much, a role he thought the CEAs played in that.
I would just chime in and agree. I've never heard Michael Dupre speak about the projects being withdrawn as a result of the CEA designation. And he did specifically reference the economic downturn.
Didn't he say tonight that there were 50?
2009 was the economic downturn. The crash was 2008. Ask me how I know. And so, yeah, it was 2009 would have been in the economic downturn.
I mean, but he did say that he had 50 applications that were pulled, right? I don't know if it was.
Yes, but they're also saying that partly could have been due to the economic downturn. So you can't blame that all on.
So I think maybe, I'll get in touch with him again, just to clarify a couple of things. I'll be happy to call him to clarify that, because I think for me, the biggest thing is I don't want people to have their properties devalued because of a law that we may not need because we have all of those tools already.
So I'd like to just ask, I know that Lyle and I were both at the training for the mappers, and I don't know how many other of the planning board members have gone to that training. But if you don't know about those tools and understand how to use them, you won't have the ability to pull this up readily as a planning board. This helps you provide that. The applicants can go and see it themselves, what's there. We don't have to then do it as part of seeker, getting into part 2 and part 3, where there's already been, I think this is what he was referring to, is that they've already put a lot of time and effort into site plans and drawings and all kinds of, pages and pages of stuff to have us bring it up then. That's, the whole idea of the preconceptual. But again, unless we take it upon ourselves individually to go pull up those mappers and try to understand what's there. Yes, we could refer to Ingrid's maps, even though they've never been adopted. And it's like, oh, wow, we can keep this in our back pocket. But, if we don't always remember to do that, or we're not all around 5 years from now or 7 years from now or whatever, this puts it in place as a tool for both the applicants and the planning board.
I agree with what Amanda is saying, and the fact that I believe it was Jane who said, Amanda knows all these things. What about when Amanda's not on the board? What about when people?
Amanda will always be on the board.
I don't think that's true. And I
I'm
mean,
kidding,
it's
Scott.
not true because, you know,
Then somebody else will have to learn to do it to
In
do
any
the
case.
Amanda role.
in any case, I agree with what Amanda is saying. I think this makes our jobs easier. I think that it makes it easier for applicants, again, to not have to make changes to their plans, to have to know what to expect beforehand. I'm not convinced that this, especially based on what, the chair of the Hyde Park, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, board said, what Michael said, he made it seem as though he gave me the impression that this was not deterring I felt he was explicit with that there was no real impact as far as people not wanting to come before the board because of this specifically.
Well, he would not know that. How would he know that if you don't get an application? He wouldn't know if an application didn't come in. I don't know.
Look, I think for me, it's a question of scale. 10% of a town and 38% of a town is different. That's one issue for me.
But it's
Now,
not,
excuse me, there's no right and wrong here. I'm not making this decision. The town board's going to make the decision. Do what you're going to do. But, we're entitled to not think all alike. We don't have to be in lockstep. Every point somebody makes doesn't have to be beaten down and refuted. I mean, I'm entitled to my opinion, and I represent people too.
Nobody's saying you aren't, and
this is the handed down part, Stana. This is going to help you. This is going to be a good thing. This is like broccoli. This is not necessary. If the town board's going to do it, fine, we'll do it. But there's this sort of like we're all supposed to sign on and get on the bus.
I don't see it that way at all, Jane.
I'm telling you, that's the way it feels to me.
Okay,
you don't have to see it that way.
I see it very differently. I see it as they're wanting our input, and so they're being as open as possible and giving us the chance to let them know how we feel about it, and I appreciate that.
We did, and then they came back to us with a program.
Inviting us to the table. I see it very differently.
Well, look, I'm used to working in groups, so there's been no back and forth on this issue. This issue went from us giving a written statement, then we didn't hear anything about it for a year, and then suddenly it was having, a public hearing and a town board, and we were sort of divorced from it. So now it's back, but it's sort of like already, they're going to decide what they're going to decide. So I'm a little, again, I'm mystified and I'm feeling a little like pushed, and it isn't a great feeling. That's all I'm saying. I mean, this is not personal. I'm not upset, but it just feels like that. And we're smart people. We get it.
Thank you. Okay, hold on. Lyle?
I think in one respect, I agree with Jane, but not for the same reason. I think that a problem with the maps and the mapping technology is the scale. Is that the scale is too large, that you are too small. You can't say what's on a piece of property from looking at a map of the town with these areas defined. That you have to be able to look at it in a much finer detail. And I think that the CEAs have the same problem, is they're lumping all of the Shawangum Ridge is not the same. All of the Plutarch Ridge is not the same. There are farms over there. There are people that live there already. I just feel like that there's a broad brush there of marking everything purple or green or whatever, and it's not taking into account the real differences in the areas. That's what I think.
Matt?
Ingrid, I have a question. It's kind of two questions. First of all, does Hyde Park have a wetlands and watercourse law like we have?
I don't believe so. I think they may have had one and it might have been repealed.
Right. It just seems like it might be a little redundant, since I'm assuming that a lot of the areas you're talking about have wetlands and water courses in them, or no?
I think they're two very different tools.
Okay.
The wetland and water course protection law really restricts and regulates land use in and around wetlands and stream corridors. It's not a tool for thinking about the conservation of landscape scale, like larger ecological features. It doesn't provide that context. It's focused on a very specific resource that on a site.
Okay. And my other question is can it be, like, I hear what Jane's saying about, like, if you own a piece of property and you want to put a shed up and all of a sudden the shed costs, $40,000 because you have to have all kinds of consultants, can it be limited to like larger new construction or something like that? So every person who doesn't buy a piece of land is like, hey, I want to build and I want to put an addition on, and they have to go through this whole rigmarole just to put an addition on their house.
I think there's misunderstanding about that. This does not apply if you want to build a shed, does not apply if you want to build an addition on your house. It does not apply if you're just building a single family house on an approved lot. So the seeker only applies to generally larger projects and subdivision of land, something like disturbance of 10,000 square feet or more. Mr. Golden could explain which projects.
Clearly these things wouldn't apply to a lot of the smaller items. I can't recall though, Ingrid, as to when does the requirement with respect to CEAs kick in? Is it only with respect to an unlisted or type 1 action? Is that specifically going to be in the
Yes.
resolution adopting this? All right.
Yes.
So if it's done with respect to a companion to seeker, Matt, then all the type 2 actions in seeker will not trigger any type of review under CEA, if that's what I hear Ingrid saying. And that doesn't mean that includes a majority, because not a majority of what you see are type 2 actions, but it certainly wouldn't apply to a shed. It wouldn't apply to a construction of a 1, 2, or 3 family residence. It wouldn't apply to commercial construction of 4,000 square feet or less. But it would apply to a lot of projects, because there's a lot of projects there aren't very many projects that fall into a type 1 action, but there are quite a number of projects that fall under an unlisted category. But it wouldn't apply to the very small projects.
Let me ask one thing, is it possible, Ingrid, to phase it in, or is that not practicable? In other words, to do, say, the obvious, to declare I don't know when they declare it, how this would work, but say to do the obvious thing, which would be the ridge, and then see how that goes, and then have a plan to implement this depending on how it works. See, I don't want to sound like I'm against it, because I'm not. And I know, we have to protect what we have here, and it's beautiful and it's special. It just, the scale of it all at once just seems, like a lot of layers.
Of course, the town board can do as they wish. That it's ultimately their choice. They could designate none of them. They could designate one of them. They could designate all 4 of them. It's up to the town board. As far as coming back and doing this again later, I would just say that this is not the first attempt at designating CEAs in New Paltz. I'm aware of at least one prior attempt more than 2 decades ago, I believe. And I think it's just a question of, what are you going to have a volunteer who's willing to pick up the mantle again and do this? It's been a tremendous amount of volunteer work. And I think there's a real risk that this work gets lost, gets forgotten, and that it will never happen. And meanwhile, these issues may not really be considered because there's not an official means of doing so in a proactive way. So I think that's the risk. Yes, you could try to do one. There's also a risk you could do one and there might not be any projects on the Shawangum Ridge that meet that seeker threshold in the next 5 years. And so you wouldn't have any evidence to go on in making a decision whether to designate others. I think it's also, again, just important to go back to like where we are right now. We're in an unprecedented real estate boom in New Paltz. There's a tremendous pressure right now for housing in New Paltz. Our real estate values have risen by nearly 30% over 1 year. I think that we can anticipate there will be more pressure in these areas. And I think it's better to be proactive in establishing policy than wait for big projects to show up and think about it then. And lastly, these are issues that are urgent just, because we are in a climate crisis, we're in a biodiversity crisis. And, can we afford to wait 10 years or 20 years and think about it then? Will you have a volunteer willing to think about it then? So those are the sorts of things I think the town board should also be considering in moving forward.
Well, if there's a plan and a map, I mean, the implementation could be done, we're all volunteers, so.
I would just say there were plans and maps done 20 years ago and I cannot find them.
Really? Well, we've all unraveled. Trying to get things done these days can be challenging. Yeah, I get it.
Oops. I don't see David here anymore. Is that right?
Yeah, no, I think he left. I don't see him on the.
Appropriate for me to say something on the behalf of the town board? Adele, would that be all right?
Well, are you speaking on behalf of the town board?
Well, I'm speaking as a town board member, I should say. Is that okay?
Sure, as a town board member, but you're not speaking on behalf of the board.
I said it wrong, yeah, as a town board member, since there's no other representative here, and we were asked if we wanted to come. David was hoping that there could be a discussion, and the reason we wanted to come back and possibly some of us participate in this discussion was because we had a real change a real awakening once we listened to Michael Dupree. I had a lot of takeaways that my notes that aren't with me right here right now, but I was really struck by a number of things, including him saying things like, it's still in the planning board's hands. It's still, so in other words, it's sort of still up to them. They just have to, do what they need to do with it being a CEA, but it doesn't hamstring them. He was very positive about it being something that did not drive developers away. That was a clear message. There's a video did you by chance pass that around, Ingrid? The video of our meeting. So if anyone's interested.
David shared it.
Pardon?
David shared it.
Okay,
David
so,
Brownstein.
he spoke longer, and I think it might have, but it really tipped our board, and we thought some of us anyways, thought very differently about it and very positively about it, and we were excited, to see, with David's, he wanted some consensus, just to, bring maybe a different understanding too, based on, David's presentation. So
Consensus between the planning board and the town board is what you're saying?
Yeah, for sure.
So
we don't talk to each other. I mean,
well,
hardly.
Well, if it's going to be that kind of joint meeting, we should have a joint meeting. Because this is not officially a joint meeting, right? This is just whoever wants.
Not, but we were all invited. I came.
But here's the thing. I've been on the planning board for 3 or 4 years now. And it's always been kind of tricky talking to the town board. It's like we're not supposed to. So there's never really been a consensus. And our experience, and I'm plain spoken, so I'm just going to say it. Our experience is, what's your opinion? And we give your opinion, then we never hear anything else, and you guys do what you want. So, it's gotta be much more of a two-way street. I think if we're going to reach a consensus, all these things have got to be, talked about, maybe offline, maybe not at these big meetings that are, where it's sort of on the record, but maybe at
With
smaller
open meetings law, you
This
know,
is Neil.
if
I wanted
you have
to
more than
comment.
two people in a meeting, you're going to need to have it filmed.
Public meeting,
You know, it'd be official.
Yeah, now I know about the law, but
Hey,
you smoke.
am I unmuted?
Yeah, no, you're good, Neil. Neil?
Okay,
You're
so
hiding,
yeah,
Neil.
this is Neil.
I didn't see
I've
you.
been here the whole time. And I
Hi.
wanted to comment on, I just wanted to respond and say, well, first I want to thank Ingrid for doing such a fabulous job on this whole process. And I think especially presenting this tonight. As far as us reaching consensus, we don't need to reach consensus.
Right.
We have different jobs. Your job is to be the planning board. Our job is to be the town board. We don't tell you how to vote on planning board issues. That's your job. I really try to stay out of your lane. And as far as us not asking your opinion on stuff, that's what we're doing tonight. So you may feel put off that, you've never heard back from us. We haven't worked on this for the past year because we've been overwhelmed with COVID. This is the first time we're doing it again. And we're here trying to talk to you. So I'm sorry if people are upset that they feel like they've been ignored, but that's what we're doing with this meeting. So if you want to have input, that's what we're doing tonight. And as far as the importance of these CEAs, the questions and the response to many of your issues tonight convinced me even more of why we need them, because you continuously want to discount, like, oh, this project is different, this project is different. The importance of these CEAs that I think Ingrid has really pointed out is that the sum is greater than the parts. These are, and I really like the way Ingrid presented it, these are nationally recognized areas of importance that those qualities need to be taken into account for certain large projects. And planning boards change, members change. These CEAs will help you frame the questions that you need to ask and force you to continually step back and put things in the larger context of, like, oh, well, yes, this is just a small subdivision, and you really need to, every single project needs to be put into the bigger ecological context of how this affects the ridge or the wetlands, the Plutarch area. And without the CEAs, based on your comments tonight, I'm worried you won't do that. So that's all I have
We're
to say.
asking you to give us the confidence and respect that we not only will do it, but that we have been doing it.
I get that, Jane. And I would say, though, there's a certain amount of, expertise that, analysis that I'm not, we don't know if the board members have. For example, if you take a large, if you have a very large, proposed development, and you take away, if you just designed it a certain way, take the trees down here and not there, you keep it in front and leave the whole back, you could possibly, if it's really large, preserve like the interior forest that certain birds need. And so I don't know if you guys think like that personally, so it's without that. And then the next board members who come in, do they do that? So if they don't, this is just a fail safe, this is just a way where it's all, there's guidance, written into this, it seems, because a lot of the work is already done to tell you why it's important. Why is it a critical area? So.
Well, but I guess I feel like, I guess I've said it, you don't know us, and we don't get asked. And when we do get asked, there isn't a dialogue. So it's kind of like we seem to be working at cross purposes rather than working in communicating better. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to be critical. It's just that I've been made to feel like this, and that's not my experience in a very long, time working professionally and being very, very highly paid to do certain things. And here I am volunteering, and all of a sudden, it's like, well, I can't read, and, we don't know what you're doing, and, we got to instruct you. And it's like, well, just ask.
So I would say, I don't know if this is a appropriate answer question for Rick, but that we do more review in New Paltz. I'm going to make that statement. I feel that we do more review of applications in New Paltz than most other places. I don't know, Rick, do you feel that?
The board certainly has a lot of intensity of lots of different issues on most applications. And the only thing I'll say is that I don't think that there's going to be any real difference with or without the CEAs on those large projects, right? Those large projects are going to go through an extensive seeker process. The large projects are already referred to the ENCB for the ENCB's comments. So it's not like the planning board would be without the ENCB comments. So I don't think that the issue for the CEAs is as important on the large projects as it is for the medium to the smaller, not really small because that won't be impacted at all, but the medium to the smaller projects will get likely greater scrutiny because you're going to have to address certain issues that, because if you fail to address them, you can be sued for failing to address something. So you're going to have to address all of these issues in each of these projects. The larger projects are always going to have those issues addressed, either by the planning board's own initiative or through the good comments that the planning board receives from the ENCB on these large projects.
Okay, so I think we've decided we're not taking a vote on anything tonight. Several of us have given input, and the town board is going to do what they're going to do. We like it when the town board, the few things or the one or two things that we've made recommendations to the town board. And I hear you, Jane. They haven't taken our recommendations. So it just definitely feels as though, why do you want us to give these recommendations? Well, the burden of going through these applications falls on the planning board. And the people that scream and yell that it costs too much, it costs too much, it costs too much, it took too long, it costs too much, falls on the planning board. So we want to make sure that the things we're asking for are the things that we need to be asking for, not more or not less. And as Rick just said, the larger projects always get that kind of scrutiny and careful investigation. But I fear, as he suggested, that's the small-ish and medium-sized projects. It's going to fall on those people to spend more money. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment because we're not voting, so we can just end it there.
I was under the impression that it might help them not spend as much because they would know ahead of time what to expect and not make plans that needed to be then changed. So I see that differently. And I don't know why we don't take a vote to see how, what we would like to, what our recommendation would be.
Well, the recommendation, I think it would be hard to do that because, well, Jane said she'd like to do the ridge. I feel the same way. We want to say we want this all together. Do we want to say we all, it would have to go through a few different variations. Anybody want to make a motion? Jane, you want to make a motion? No? Okay.
Before we throw that out, I think right now might be a bad time to do this.
I agree. Okay. So I'm going to actually call Michael Dupree and have a conversation. A few things I'm a little fuzzy about. Maybe he can clarify for me a few things. If you have questions for him, maybe you can send them to me and I'll send them to him, anybody on the planning board. All right, okay. Okay. Ingrid, thank you very much. Lots of work.
Ingrid, thank you
all.
for all your work.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. That was a lot of hard work and it is really, really appreciated.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think that's it. We don't have anything else. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second,
Okay, all in favor?
aye.
Aye, bye.
Night.
Bye.
Good night.